Hi, welcome back to our Honors Geometry playlist. On this video, we're going to look at how to prove that two triangles are congruent. Now, there are three basic theorems that you definitely need to know. You've got to know your third angle theorem, that if two angles of one triangle are congruent to two angles of a second triangle, then the third angles are also congruent, and we talked about that in class, right? If I have one triangle and another triangle, and I've got maybe 50 degrees and 70 degrees, and this is 50 degrees and that's 70 degrees. Well, I know the third angle must be 60. It has to be, in order for that to add up to 180. And this must also be 60. So if I know that the two angles are already congruent, then because both triangles have to add to the same number, right, they both have to sum to 180, those angles must sum to 180, then I know that the third angles must be congruent. They must be 60, and that is a corollary of the triangle sum theorem. So writing a proof. How do I prove that two things are congruent? I need three congruent sides. I need three congruent angle pairs. So let's talk about our two triangles. I've got one on the left, and I've got one on the right. I've got these two triangles here. And what was given? I was given that AB was congruent to CB. I was given that AD was congruent to CD. I was given that angle ABD, let me do that in a different color, ABD was congruent to angle CBD. And I was given that angle ADB was congruent to angle CDB. All right, so I was given all of that information, and I need all three sides and all three angles to be congruent. So let's take a look at what is it that I still need. And usually I like to make a little list for myself of what I still need. Well, if I look at just one triangle at a time, what's missing here? What's not marked in? Well, this side is not marked. BD is not marked. And angle A is not marked. So side BD was not marked. I need that to be congruent to, well, what should it be congruent to? Let's check our congruence statement. I want BD to be congruent to BD. And I want angle, and let me be very specific about the angle name, angle BAD, right there, is congruent to angle, well, if it's B, then A, then D, it should be angle BCD on the other side. And if I were to get those two things marked in, this side and this angle, then I would have everything marked. I would have three sides, 1, 2, 3. I would have three angles, 1, 2, 3, which means my triangles must be congruent. So I'll start with my given statements. I'm not going to copy down my given statements, but you should in line 1. For line 2, I need to show, and it doesn't matter what order I do this in, but I need to show that my two angles are congruent. So I need to prove that angle BAD is congruent to angle BCD. But how can I prove that? Well, let's ask ourselves, what did I have originally? Originally, I was given two angle pairs that were equal. Well, if I was given two angles that were equal to two angles, then how could I say that the third angles would also be congruent? I could use our third angles theorem. So that's why we previewed that proof with the third angles theorem. So that's off the list. I can cross that off. And finally, I need BD to be congruent to BD. But hold on, I'm saying that something is equal to itself. There's a property from chapter 1 or chapter 2, starts with an R, that says that something is congruent to itself. That would be my reflexive property. So you will definitely need the reflexive, the symmetric, the transitive, and, at least in this chapter, the third angles theorem quite a bit to say that two triangles are congruent. Now I've crossed off everything on my list, which means that I have 3 congruent sides and 3 congruent angles. So if I have all of those corresponding parts are congruent, I can say triangle ABD is congruent to triangle CBD by the definition of congruent triangles. By what it means to be congruent, it means that all 3 sides that are corresponding must be congruent and all 3 angle pairs must be congruent. All right, let's take a look at another example. I was given all of these parts are congruent. I need to prove that the triangles are congruent. So I would copy down my given statements, and let's take a look at what is it that I still need. I need angle, what's not marked? These angle K and M are not marked. So it's an angle JKL should be congruent to PML. That's 1. It looks like the angles in the middle are not marked, so I would need angle JLK to be congruent to angle PLM. And that would give me those. And then the last thing I need, these 2 sides are not marked, so I would need KL to be congruent to ML. And once I have those 3 things, then I'm done. So I'll start with my given statements. I would write those out here. And then I'm going to look through my given statements. Are there any vocabulary words in here that I could use to find some congruent parts? And it looks like L bisects KM. What does it mean to bisect? If MK is being bisected, it's being cut in half. So that's being cut in half, which means that KL should be congruent to ML. By the definition of what it means to be a bisector. So by the definition of a segment bisector, KL is congruent to ML, so I can cross that off my list. And now let's take a look at our angle pairs. K and M, not super obvious how those 2 might be congruent, but is there any way that I could say that these 2 angles that are right across from each other are congruent? And I should be able to say that those are congruent because what kind of angle pair do you see at L? I see vertical angles. So I should be able to say that angle JLK is congruent to angle PLM because of the vertical angles theorem. that says that they should be congruent. And then I only have one more step. So I've proven that all three sides are equal, or all three corresponding parts rather are equal. I've proven that two of my angles are congruent. So how can I prove that the third angles are congruent? And if you're looking for our last proof, that third angles theorem should help me there. And then finally, my step 5, which I'm not going to fill out here because I don't have any space. My last step would be to say that my two triangles are congruent by the definition of congruent triangles. I guess I will fill it out. At least step 5. I should take that prove statement and put it right there. Okay. Now I would try these last two, or last three, if you haven't tried them yet, and then check the Google Classroom page for our completed notes. And at the bottom of the PDF, you should find the answer key to those. So let me know what questions you have, and I will see you soon.